Looking to massively uplevel your performance in all areas of life, you've come to the right place. My goal on this podcast is to take you beneath the surface so you can connect with yourself on a deeper level while providing you with valuable insights and the tools necessary to navigate life's challenges and go after your goals with strength, clarity, and wisdom. If you're ready to uncover the truth which lies underneath so you can recognize your powerful feminine leadership style, pursue your goals unapologetically, and thrive in every aspect of your life, hit the follow button and get ready to explore the incredible possibilities that lie within you. Together, we'll uncover your next steps in achieving peak performance, because actually, you can. Welcome to Actually You Can. I'm your host, Myth, and today I'm joined by Jonathon Aslay, one of America's leading midlife dating coaches. After the heartbreaking loss of his son in 2018, Jonathon embarked on a soul-searching journey that reshaped his philosophy on love. He discovered that many singles struggle with self-worth, self-regard, and self-love, often at the core of their dating challenges. Now, through his book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway, and his Midlife Mastery program, Jonathon inspires people around the world to embrace true self-love. Welcome to the show, Jonathon. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Well, I'm honored to be here, Miff. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be fun.
And so I'm going to jump straight in, and I'd love to hear what you mean by when you say dating is a path to self-love.
So I've recognized that dating and relationships trigger what I believe to be the number one emotional health wound that most everybody's experiencing. And that is, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, or I'm not likable. Because particularly in our current dating environment, sadly, because of our devices, if you will, um, online dating now far exceeds any other portal to meeting someone. And because we're oftentimes meeting strangers, we don't have a sense of who they are. We have to go through this accelerated learning curve of getting to know someone. And many people aren't prepared for this accelerated learning curve. And it ends up triggering a lot of our stuff. And now you mentioned I'm a midlife dating coach, and I tend to work with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s because mostly that demographic is divorced, a significant percentage. But that's not to say 20 and 30-year-olds don't have their own challenges to deal with. But when you've had multiple relationships in your life, if you've had a childhood wound or trauma that went unaddressed, the minute you engage in relationship with someone else, all of your stuff starts to bubble up to the surface. Hence why dating triggers are, quite frankly, I believe dating triggers our need, or dating relationships trigger our need to actually work on ourselves, which is kind of the impetus of the book that I wrote as well.
And so you mentioned that being in relationships can trigger all that stuff. So begs the question, why would we do that to ourselves? Why would we want to be in relationships when it just triggers
Well,
all of our stuff, right?
actually, it's funny you say that because I immediately thought of the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney. And there's a scene where he's talking to his future brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law is about to get married and he's having second thoughts. And George Clooney says, life is better with company. And what I felt like what that meant is life is better with a life mate, with a partner, with someone from let's just say a romantic perspective, but certainly family can be included in that. Life is better with company. Friends is included in that. But most importantly, a romantic partner, someone who has your back, someone that's committed to you, someone that will be there for you when you need them. It's oftentimes dating or relationships hyper focus on entertainment and the good stuff, but they don't really contemplate in the early stages, hey, I need a ride to get a colonoscopy today. Will you drive me to it? And again, in your age demographic, 20 and 30-year-olds, you're probably not thinking about this, but believe me, by the time you get to midlife, there's a whole different purpose for mating with someone. And that is actually building a life with someone so you can grow. I don't want to say old with, but grow with.
It's really interesting you mentioned the different ages, and I'm just gonna throw this out there. I'm
Sure.
I'm mid-30s and my husband, I'm not some crazy old person who's just sitting by themselves and like life is easy by themselves. I have chosen the challenge of a relationship, and
Yeah.
my husband closer to 40. And I've noticed a lot of peers in his age group, men in particular, they've got young kids, but now they're getting
Yeah.
divorced from their partners, and they're choosing partners who are in their early 20s
Yeah.
or mid 20s. Why do you think that is?
Why do men choose younger partners?
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
would say,
after midlife.
let's be realistic. There's ego involved. There's something, when you're a man in your 40s or even 50s, it's an ego boost, or even a man in his 60s and 70s, but let's talk about that early 40-year-old man. It's an ego boost for one thing. B, oftentimes men will say that the woman who is younger has less baggage. Now, I
Yeah,
prefer to reframe that to luggage than baggage, just because baggage could mean a lot of different things. But, someone who's also in their 40s that has children, let's say a man who's in his 40s has children, might not want to date someone else who's in that same age bracket that, would require blending lives. So those are some of the primary reasons, but I'm gonna say, let's just be real. It's ego.
yeah, it's like because as people do, they tell their own stories about it, and I'm always like, maybe it's that age demographic reminds them of what their life was before kids, before life got a bit more complicated and maybe better times. That's kind of what my theory came to, but again,
Well,
I think you summarize it really well with ego.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. That's all ego to some degree. And I mean, I could have went into the granular variations of that. Here's the thing. Just because you're a 42-year man and you want a 22-year-old woman doesn't mean you're going to get it. I mean, let's be realistic. You can want it all day long, but to some degree, what do you bring to the table? You know, and I would say oftentimes, unless you have resources, which I'm using the term money, you might not have a lot to bring to the table to that 22-year-old, especially because you have your own luggage in your life. So, unless now, what does it say about the younger woman who wants the older guy? Well, I would
Yeah.
venture to say there's a thing called daddy issues that is probably
Yes.
propping up in that particular case. So, and no disrespect to that. No, no, I mean, but I would venture to say there's a correlation there.
Yeah, and I think it links to what you mentioned with triggers and wounds and all
Yeah,
that sort of stuff. That's linking to probably why seeking out particular characteristics in a partner. But I think what you've mentioned about self-love being a really essential element to relationships, I'd love to talk more about that. What
sure.
do you think stops people from fully loving themselves, and how does that impact their relationships?
So, I want to look at the word, the term self-love, and it doesn't mean manicures and pedicures. Let me just be clear. That's self-care. Okay, massages, pedicures, manicures, that sort of thing. Exercising. That's all. But that is, in a way, loving oneself. When I think of self-love, I think of self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-reliance, self-discipline. All of these words. And the reason why we encapsulate it in love is the idea is to redirect all of that love for oneself so we don't require it from somebody else. We don't need validation for someone else to feel good about ourselves. So that's what I just want to identify that. When I think of self-love, I want everyone to write this down. I'd like you to write the term know thyself. Know thyself. And what this is an exercise into introspection. So and let's take it, let's for the moment, let's talk about it from the concept of dating and relationships. Okay. So to know oneself would start by recognizing what is your love attachment style? What is your love attachment style? Now, might be foreign to the person hearing this for the first time. So I'm going to reach into my bookshelf and I'm going to point out a book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. And there's more books as well, but this is kind of the premier book to understand how oftentimes we attach to another human being. And there's basically what's known as secure and insecure attachment style. And within insecure, there is anxious and avoidant. And then there's some variations between them. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you something, Myth. Most everybody will fill out the questionnaire on attachment style, and they will fill out with the way they think they are versus the way they actually are. And a majority, a significant percentage of people believe that they are secure versus insecure. Okay. I just say that's poppycock. Because I think we human beings have a capacity to gaslight ourselves. But when you're truly introspective and you've studied the concept of this book, you will be better prepared to enter into the dating marketplace knowing your attachment style. Now, here's where it gets really more granular, and we're going to get into the fun stuff. Self awareness. Now, in my mind, self awareness is recognizing one's fears and insecurities, particularly when it comes to love, like really understanding them, really knowing them. In other words, knowing it so well that you don't need someone else to tell you about it because you already know it. Okay. In addition, knowing your negative judgments of other human beings. We humans have a capacity to point the finger at other people without looking at those three fingers pointing back. It's so easy to blame than to take ownership. Negative judgments of others. Okay, another part of self-awareness is how to know how to recognize that your actions towards others might have collateral damage or consequences if you are in a selfish state. Sadly, here, at least in the United States, I can't speak for beautiful Australia, we have a very myopic, self-centric population of human beings. And yes, they do nice things in charity and philanthropic and all that stuff, but we're still rather, self-centric here in the United States. Not everybody, I'm just saying, but particularly myopic means we're only in our own bubble. So we might not recognizing that just because we want something doesn't mean that that couldn't hurt someone else in the dating realm. Okay. In addition, knowing your limiting belief system, knowing your negative patterns that bring pain. In other words, what types of patterns do we have? For example, if a person continually dates if you're a woman who constantly dates the bad boy, well, then take ownership of that and go, wait a minute, maybe and it hurts every time you get dumped by the bad boy. Maybe I need to make a change in my life. That's self awareness. And lastly, within self awareness, is learning how to shift to love whenever you're in pain. How do you shift to trust? How do you shift to faith? And this is where the deeper work of healing our childhood wounds and our adult traumas. And everybody's got them. I don't care if you thought you had the most perfect childhood. Believe me, something happened in grade school that could have messed you up. Okay. You could have had a bully. You could have had a teacher that said, I had a teacher tell me I was stupid. Created my entire identity was I thought I was stupid. And I mean, I'm over 50 years old and I still think that. Okay. Um, so healing these parts of us is what better prepares us for a relationship. I know I took a long time to get to your answer, but I felt like we had to go granular here. And
No,
there's more to know thyself, which I mean, we could do 5 podcasts on it.
I love all that. And I would love for you to paint a picture for the listeners. What does a relationship look like that where you go into it and you love yourself versus a relationship that you go into and you don't love yourself? What sort of differences you could expect?
Well, I think the best way, and that was a great question, but I think knowing your standards and having boundaries is a person that loves themselves, like knowing their standards. And we have to get into standards in a moment. But the person who doesn't love themselves oftentimes doesn't have clear standards, but more importantly, doesn't have boundaries around those standards. So let me give you an example of a standard of mine. Okay. I'm looking, and I happen to be single in the dating marketplace. I'm looking for a relationship that early on we can spend 3 or 4 days and nights a week together, doing shared activities, hobbies, mutual interests, spending time with family and friends, traveling together, teamwork building skills, both in our personal and our professional life, intimacy, both physical and emotional intimacy, that leads to either moving in together or getting married. That's a standard. Okay. That's just painting. Now, that doesn't include all my values within that. That adds to your standards. Okay. So, knowing my standard, I'm probably not going to date someone who lives, 18 hours away that can, works 24 hours a day. Like in other words, and I'm being intentionally, by the way, folks, I live in Los Angeles. We're 10,000 miles away from each other right now in this beautiful medium called the internet. Um, so knowing my standards. Now, a boundary, now we have to get more into your values, more into your needs, particularly your needs, and being able to express your needs in relationship. And if someone isn't meeting your needs, the boundary, I love the way Brene Brown talks about boundaries. It's what's okay and what's not okay for me. So when a person loves themselves, they do a better job of expressing their needs within that standard I talked about and their boundaries within those needs. And it's interesting, Myth? I have observed that most humans don't really know how to articulate their needs. And more importantly, how to articulate it in a way that's seen, heard, and understood. And if I said they don't know how to articulate, let's even go. Oftentimes, they don't even know what they're actually feeling. They might know what they're thinking, but what they're actually feeling on an emotional level, and then coming out in words, and then those words actually have meaning behind it instead of a lot of wah 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 wah. And compassionate communication is one of the other reasons why relationships struggle. And folks, if you haven't read the book, now, forgive the title. The title says Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Okay. It should have been titled Compassionate Communication. The reason why it's titled Nonviolent is because we oftentimes in relationship, when a need isn't being met, we articulate it in a combative way, an accusatory way, a blaming way. Remember when I talked about the finger being pointed? That's the way we oftentimes communicate. And what does that naturally make a person do? Get defensive. So there's this criticism about people that get defensive. Well, oftentimes it's because the communication to us is coming in a combative way.
And you mentioned standards and boundaries, and that
Okay.
can be a really common difference between um, people who have self-love and people that don't. I'd love to dig into both of those because I know some great girlfriends who you would say they have really strong standards and boundaries, yet they
Okay.
find it really hard to date people. So I'm assuming that, with anything, there could be too much of something or something's too rigid, or maybe they're just looking in the wrong places for this sort of stuff. But I'd love to dig into more. What is a standard and how can you make sure it's a healthy, I don't want to say realistic, but I don't have any other words at the moment, but realistic standards that you can expect others to be able to meet.
So I'm what occurred to me right when you asked that question? I'm thinking about expectations
Yeah.
versus standards.
Great.
Your friends that you're speaking of might have expectations of another human being. And so, I expect you to call me morning, noon, and night to let me know you still love me, okay? And and then they demand it at that level. Well, then that turns it takes a standard and makes it an expectation, okay? Because a standard is also one, like when I shared my standard of, now I was just sharing the standard of what type of relationship I was looking for, just to give some context, okay? Now, in a relationship, one of my highest values is reciprocity. Reciprocity is, being a teammate with one another. It's taking turns, maybe even planning and paying for dates as an example of reciprocity. And I don't mean equality or anything like that. I'm just talking about give and receive, give and receive. It's one of my highest values, for example. Personal development is one of my absolute highest values. Spirituality. So But if I say to you, okay, I expect you to go, like, I'm just going to use spirituality as an example. Well, I need you to go to church with me every day of the week and carry your Bible with you as an example. And again, I'm being rhetorical here for a moment. You know, it's you're now creating an expectation of another versus saying, and that might be your standard too. That might be your expectation that you have to find someone who meets that standard or that expectation versus imposing it upon someone else. But my guess is where your friends are dealing with is most likely egoic expectations versus heart-centered expectations. Okay. Um, there's this thing called the 666, 6 foot tall, 6 foot, what is it? 6 foot tall, six-figure income, 6-inch penis. A lot of women are seeking the 666. It's kind of interesting. That's a satanic number.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was gonna say.
I mean, I'm sorry. Well, I just I just watched a TikTok video on this earlier, so popped in my head. Okay. And the challenge with that expectation is the average height of a man is 5'9", as an example. Okay. So, and the average height of men 6 foot and over is less than 15%. So you literally eliminated, you know, 85% of your population. Six-figure income, less here in the United States, less than 20% make over that number. So you're now eliminating again 80% of the population. And then I mean, I don't even want to get into the penis size, but do you see where an expectation could be if you have this gigantic expectation, you might be missing out on some really good heart-centered people.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned in that, and I think egoic expectations versus heart-centered expectations, that's a really great lens to look at because the first thing I would ask someone who says that, I'd be like, okay, why is that important to you? Why is them being over 6 foot important to you? And some people might have a really good reason. I would find it hard to think of a really
Well, I'm five
heart-centered
foot
reason.
six and
Yeah.
I wear 5-inch heels. So, like I'm gonna hear this all day long. I'm like, how
Yeah.
often are you really wearing your heels? And then when I hear it from women 5'2", I'm like, really? Leave the tall men to the women who are actually taller than you.
Yeah. But I'm also like, even why does height matter? Like,
Well, it's interesting because there's this, I believe, an egoic belief that a taller man is a better protector. Okay.
yeah, okay.
Now here's the tricky part. I'm 6'2". Okay. Um, Bruce Lee, a famous martial artist, 50 plus years ago, was 5'7", 5'8" at best. He could kick the crap out of 20 guys all at once. And I
Yeah.
can't fight my way out of a paper bag. There's this, like, I mean, I honestly, if you want to be protected, I'm screwed because I have never been taught how to fight. I've never had to really defend myself. So that notion is an ego-based notion versus, again, someone fight. By the way, the average Navy SEAL, who are the baddest hombres on the planet, are 5'9.5". That's the average height of a Navy SEAL. So it's a egoic measure, not based in fact even. That's the funny part of the whole desire.
Yeah, that's so true. And I hope that's caused someone to stop and look at their expectations and be like, hang on a minute, like, is this really heart led or is it just my ego thinking it wants a particular thing?
But you just said something, and I'd like to piggyback on this
Yeah.
for a moment because there's a really amazing book called If the Buddha Dated. And I read this like the minute I picked it up, I couldn't put it down, by Charlotte Castle. Um, it's about how to date from a heart-centered perspective, how to be in how to operate, and it takes out all the gender rhetoric and says, okay, how can two people connect at a heart-centered level? And to really operate from that space of your heart versus I think humans operate from the place of what can I get versus what can I give. I think that's the way we've been conditioned is what can I get instead of what can I give? Now, I know there is a lot of women out there and men who are gigantic givers and they get walked on and they're people pleasers and all that kind of stuff. And I certainly, I think it's wonderful to be a person who's a giver, but it's also, this is where boundaries and balance comes in the equation. But a lot of people operate because remember I said earlier, we're myopic, we're all focused on our own needs. Very few people go on a date and go, "What can I do for the other person?" And by the way, getting dressed up so you can, appear attractive to you. I spent all this time and money to get attractive for you. No, you did it for yourself. That's bullshit to say you did it for them. You did them to either appeal to them, but you did it for yourself. So, what are you actually doing for another person? Just something to think about.
I really like that because I think you're right that a lot of I guess, the debriefs I get from my friends who are currently in the dating world, it's like, "Oh, I expect X, Y, Z, and they should do this for me." And I'm not sure if it's just when girlfriends get together, we generally bitch about stuff. Like we
Yeah.
don't go, "Oh, my life is wonderful." It's just the human nature. You talk about the challenges that you're having. But I'd be interested if actually any of them thought about in those situations, what can they give? Because I think to your point, exactly especially when we're starting to date, it's like, "Oh, what can you do for me? I'm sussing you out. Show me why I should be
Yeah.
dating you."
There's a show, I believe it's out of Australia, or the first one called Dating on the Spectrum or Love on the
Yeah,
Spectrum. And
yeah.
what I love it, there was this one gentleman, Michael, I believe his name is, and he was like, and it's so fascinating because when you're on the spectrum, you operate without a filter. I mean, you just literally blurt out what's ever coming out of your mind. But he was such a giver, it was like he was the quintessential example of how he walked in, at least the way I observed it. I mean, someone else could have observed it differently, but no filter, just giving. And he really wanted a relationship so bad. He wanted it so bad. It's a beautiful illustration of actually how I think illustration of how to date without that ego, because these are really little kids dating from their heart, so to speak.
That's so true. And I would love to learn as well, like if you're dating and you just can't seem to find the right person. So you're
Yeah.
going, I'm just dating so many people. I just can't find the person that's my match, that's my soulmate. What's going on here? What from your experience would you be looking to share with this person?
So, this is such a great question and it's a big, gigantic question. I do believe that we are in an evolution in humanity, unlike any other time in human history, that we're no longer predominantly focused on survival and protection. Okay. Other than there are parts of the world that are going through gigantic fear based of war
Yeah.
and things like that. So, why I'm bringing this up is for the first time in humanity, we can be introspective. In other words, we can actually work on ourselves. And the fact is we are bombarded on social media about mental and emotional health. There's a bombardment. I mean, honestly, I'm not really a dating or relationship coach. I'm here to encourage personal development, self help, and spiritual work. It's why my book, which you can see behind me, is a
Mhm.
book about personal development, self help. It's not about dating. Why I believe this is we are being invited in our human history to actually learn to regulate our emotions, to understand our emotions, to understand ourselves so much better as individuals. And as I said earlier, dating and relationships trigger our stuff like nobody's business. So I think the reason why it's challenging is we're actually learning what's right for us. And what I mean to say is the average person today has 3 to 5 significant relationships in their lives. And if you have had 5 significant relationships and you're still single, technically you have a zero success rate. Okay. But each relationship was a success if you are introspective about it. Now, most everybody will point the finger. They'll do this. It was his fault. It was her fault. It was his fault. It was her fault. They point the finger. Okay. Instead of looking at themselves. So when a human being looks at every relationship from the vantage point of What positive things about myself did I learn in this relationship? How did I heal my childhood wound or attachment style in this relationship? What was good about each relationship? What am I most grateful for? When you can turn it inward and be introspective, each relationship was a gift preparing you for the next relationship, hopefully, if you're introspective. But most people are operating, sadly, and this is the United States, I can only speak for us. We are operating from the perspective I need you to love me so I can feel good about myself. I need you to love me so I can feel good. No, no, no. I need you to love me so I can feel good about myself instead of I feel good about myself and I can love another. And when two sovereign beings show up, they have the greatest chance for success if they're aligned with one another.
I love saying to my husband in a loving way, it's like, I'll look after my shit and heal my wounds and make sure I
Yeah.
feel really good about myself. I need you to do the same. And
Yeah.
together we'll have a really healthy, fulfilling relationship. What's your thoughts on that?
You immediately reminded me of I think it was a joke I heard from Chris Rock. He said, relationships, you're in the service business. You are here to serve the other. Okay. But just like when you get on the airplane and the flight attendant says, in case of cabin pressure change, if oxygen mask will be dropped, and if you'll be traveling with the small children, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. You can't be of service to another until you serve yourself. And what you're saying, what I think you and your husband are saying is we are two sovereign beings. Okay. I'll be in charge of my shit. You be in charge of your shit. There's a collective we between the two of us. But,
Yeah.
and please forgive me use the word shit. Uh, not that I haven't already cursed, um, but that's effectively, but really a healthy relationship. You're in service for the other. And yet, sadly, as we said earlier in this broadcast, oftentimes we show up instead of what can I give? What can I get? Oh, he didn't pay for the date. He wanted me to split the date. Like, in other words, oh, he didn't pay for my valet at the date. Like all this getting instead of well, I showed up. Isn't that enough? You know?
And I think because what I've learned being in a relationship too, I mean, when we moved in together, there's nothing more triggering than sharing a life with someone else.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of like, oh shit, what have we done moments is we moved in together and we were just unpacking our things and he put the forks in a particular space in the cupboard. I'm like, the forks don't go there. The forks
Yeah.
go here. And he's like, no, no, the forks have always gone here. And I was like, no, no, the forks have always gone here. And I'm like, neither of us was right or wrong. Like we're both just sharing our previous conditioning. Like in my house, the forks went here and his house, the forks went there.
Yeah.
But in that moment, it's going, okay, how can we work through this for the sake of our relationship? It's acknowledging, okay, I believe this because of my experience. You believe this because of your experience. Now that we're both understanding of where this is coming from, we can work more proactively on solving whatever the problem was. And, where the blocks were was more important to me. So I got the upper hand in that one. But I think that sort of highlighted just the importance of it's something so trivial. I mean, cutlery for fuck's sake. But it just highlighted the importance of having an understanding of where your beliefs come from, because you can be putting your stuff onto someone else, which is really, it's actually just your stuff. And until that person has triggered it in you, you might never have given it a second thought.
Well, it's interesting as you're sharing this, I want to share a deeper concept. And that is relationship readiness. Okay. So I want everyone to envision relationship readiness is first your desire, your capacity, and a vision. I wish if I had three hands, I would do one. Oh, I'll do it 1, 2, 3. Desire, capacity, or capable is another word for that. And vision for a relationship exceeds your fears and your pains from your past. Okay. So any past pains, any past fears, any, abandonment issues, any self worth issues, your desire, capacity, and vision exceeds that. So for someone to get there, they have to be committed to commitments. Okay. Committed to commitment. Everybody needs to write this down because in our current dating environment, most everybody is committed to casual. And when you are in a
Yes.
casual relationship, there are no standards. You'll accept anything. because it's casual. Okay. Now, what you just described were preferences or differences. The silverware, right? By the way, just so you know, in my house, in the dishwasher, the forks and knives go down. I will not have them going up. That's one of my top value, and I'm being tongue in cheek here. It's because I don't
Yeah.
want to accidentally cut my hand. Okay. And I don't know why
Fair.
nobody else
Fair.
gets this. Okay. Because 50% of
Yeah.
the population thinks they get clean better. No, the water comes from the bottom. It doesn't, and I feel like this is one like, okay, if you don't accept it, this is a deal breaker for me, and I'm being tongue in cheek. Okay. But differences are preferences. Okay. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Does my desire for this person exceed the differences or the preferences? Because everybody is going to have differences within their preferences. But basically what I'm saying is my love or care for this person exceed the differences? Because sadly, we oftentimes, I can't remember who the therapist that said this, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? So in the case of you and your husband, you took a preference difference and you weighted it as a 6 out of a scale of 10, and he weighted it a 4 out of 10. Okay, I'd rather be right because it's a 4 out of 10. I don't think it was a 10 out of 10. In my case, it's a 10, it's a 9 out of 10. So she would have to be 10 out of 10, you know, to want to supersede that. And I'm willing to acquiesce if it was a 10 out of 10. And I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but there's radical differences in so many. The reality is love is our capacity to look past our preferences. And actually, I've been thinking a lot about this. I think I made a note of it. It's you're going to have your differences. Okay. First, I think it's important to understand those differences, to understand. Okay. And if at least you understand the difference instead of locked into position of, I'm right, you're wrong. Understand that person's preference, okay? But let's take it we'll go one level above understanding is accepting. Okay, I accept that's the way the person wants to operate, okay? And then let's go another step. We say we go understanding, accept, and appreciate. When we can actually appreciate the difference, we're stepping into deeper love. And then we can even go one step further. I mean, appreciate, I was going to say adore the difference. So let's use an example. Did you ever watch Friends in the show
Yeah.
Friends? Okay. Monica. Monica was a little bit OCD, right? When I
Just a
say
bit.
a little bit, I mean a gigantic a lot. Well, first we had to learn to first we had to tolerate the difference. Then we understood who she was. Then we begin to accept who she was. Eventually we start to appreciate who was. And at the end, Chandler chose her because he adored the things in her she didn't even probably like in herself. That is stepping into love when we can actually go to even a place of adoring those differences.
That's such a refreshing way to look at it. I'm just picturing like a cycle. I often say, when challenges occur, I support clients to go through the grieving cycles. I feel like this is like the love cycle. It's like, okay, how do we get through each of these stages and each of these steps?
Well,
But
so
first of all,
step
yeah,
one is tolerating it. Step
yeah,
two is understanding. Step
mm,
three is accepting. Step
mm.
four is appreciating. And step five is adoring, which is kind of the same as appreciating. And I mean, I don't know if you saw the movie Good Will Hunting
No, I
um,
haven't.
with um, with Matt Damon and Robin Williams. And there's a scene where he talks about his wife's picadillos or his picadillos. In other words, the prickly parts of us. And he really starts to really speak from the heart how he learned to love all of those prickly parts. you know? Now, let me be clear, and I want to go back. I didn't say this earlier. I don't mean bad behavior. I don't mean, I don't mean, you know, um, any sort of abuse or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our preference differences, our way of doing things different, our vision, that sort of thing. And just like every character in Friends had their own peculiarity, and you learn to love them all for their peculiarities. That's where real love resides, in the acceptance of differences.
And hearing you talk about that out loud, I mean, we're all weird. We all have weird ways of doing things, but we don't think it's weird. It's only until someone tells us that it's weird that we think it's weird. Like otherwise, I would just say what I do is normal, and so would you. It's only until someone puts their lens of it, and it's suddenly a bit peculiar. But I
Well,
love
there's a
what you mentioned.
quote by Dr. Seuss that says, uh, we're all a little weird. Life's a little weird. And when we find someone whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up in mutual weirdness and call it love. Um, I think sadly, at least we've now become so self-centered. Again, here's the United States, so self-centric, so myopic, so focused on self, that we forget to actually be compassionate and loving, even though that's what our heart desires most, you know?
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned before, the framework, having the desire, the capacity, or being capable, and the vision, all of those needing to be exceeding the fears and the pain. Because
Yeah.
a lot of the listeners of the show and a lot of women I work with are really strong, independent women, and they do what they want, when they want, however they want. And so it's even just that they'll say, "Oh, I want to be in a relationship." Like, do you actually want to? Because that will involve you sharing your time with someone. You'll need to be taking their needs and preferences into consideration. And you've been doing you for such a long time, and you love it. Like that's what makes you you at the
Yeah.
moment. And it's yeah, I really like. I've
By the
never
way,
looked
you
at it.
just said
Yeah,
something though. You said something critically important. See, your girlfriends or the women you talk about may desire a relationship, but their capacity
yeah,
is down here because there's a fear or pain driving that that unrealistic expectation.
yeah,
Okay. Because they literally, I mean, no disrespect. And by the way, men do this too. So it's
yeah.
not singular to women. But there's such a ridiculous, unrealistic expectation based on some fear that hasn't been addressed. And so it makes them incapable of being in a relationship. And hence why, going back to the question, why are people single? Well, either there's a lot. I always say you either grow from a relationship or you grow with a relationship. And
Yeah.
many relationships come in our lives to help us grow individually, not necessarily grow with another. So, to your friends, I would say, look, really self examine. And if you believe the problem is men, then you better go in the mirror and look. And when I say problem, you better really examine, the way you operate. Because as I said, know thyself. Without looking inward, and if you're pointing the finger at someone else, then you gotta look in the mirror.
Is there ever too much of a can you ever navel gaze too much? Like, can there be too are there any situation where the relationship is like, "Actually, no, that was just the other person?" Or is it I mean, I believe there's always something you can
Well,
learn from particular situations, but I know one girlfriend I'm thinking of in particular, she just beats the crap out of herself after every relationship. I'm like, I think it's more so the type of person you're attracting rather than you, but also that would be a you thing because you are attracting the relationship. What would you say to that?
I here's the tricky part. I mean, first off, if you've experienced genuine abuse, and whether it's verbal or physical abuse, I am not here to negate any of that. I mean, I wanna say 97% is the other person. I mean, we always have to look at what was I willing to accept,
Yeah,
and did I take a red flag and paint it green at the very early onset? We gotta take ownership of
yeah.
that. Oftentimes we wear rose-colored glasses, so we have to take that 3% ownership. Okay. Those are in the extreme cases. I would say if someone became an alcoholic, and started to, they were on a self-destructive path and you ended the relationship for that, um, I guess the question would be, how long did you accept that before you made a change? Take ownership of that piece of it. Okay. Um, there are, you know, I would say most couples really don't understand the mechanics of a healthy, happy relationship. And the word mechanics, what does that mean? How does this work? Like, how does a clock work? Okay. There are parts and moving parts. Most couples don't know. And this is why there's a book called The Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman. Let's just take out the word marriage and replace it with relationship. This would be a good place to start learning about how to be in a relationship. Like we've been indoctrinated that the minute two people mate, you just naturally know how to, make a relationship work. Let me
Yeah.
tell you something. Let me tell you where it really, I'm a parent, okay? I had no idea how to be a parent, and everything you wing it, you learn it. And believe me, I wish I could go back in time with what I know today to be a parent because I fucked my kids up with my own dysfunctionality. And I would like to do it over again, knowing what I know today, because this much time studying what it took to being a parent, other than making a diaper and paying the bills. Okay. Um, so relationships are oftentimes learn on the job, but now we have so many resources that can help us be better at the most important decision we're ever going to make in our lives is who do we mate with? It's probably the most important decision, and yet we go in so naively, so ambivalent, so ignorant, and we believe chemistry equals relationship success. This is why we roughly have a relationship success is such a low percentage. It's like the worst technology on the planet. It it ends or fails more often than it exceeds or succeeds, excuse me, not exceeds. Um, and I don't mean to sound like a defeatist when I say that, but that's just the reality because the real lesson of a relationship is the individual growth comes from it. That's the real value, hence self-love.
And you hit one of my triggers. I know when my husband and I were talking about marriage, I'm like, why would we get married? Why would we ruin the good thing we have by getting married? Because all the relationships I have evidence of in my life ended up in divorce. His parents are happily married and have been for a very long time. But I was like, why would you ruin what we have with marriage? Because all marriages end in divorce. But that was, yeah, a really good opportunity to challenge that belief.
Are you married? You're married though.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you know
So
what?
I overcame it.
Here's and I'm gonna advocate for marriage. In that here's the thing, we can exit a marriage for the most part whenever we want and forgetting. Now, do I believe we need a contract with the government? I'm not so sure about that. You can do a spiritual marriage instead of a legal marriage. But certainly there are some important facets of the minute two people merge lives together that does have a financial ramification associated with it. And I think it's important to have conversations a lot about that before, in the middle, throughout your entire life as a couple. Here's the thing, Myth. There's an emotional collateral damage to invest in a person and not have it work out. And then invest in a person and not have it work out, and invest in a person and not have it work out, and invest. There is an emotional consequence, oftentimes collateral damage for one or both people. I believe when we are committed to commitment, there's no vagueness to it. We are intentional. We make better choices in our lives. That's the value of being committed to commitment. You're going to do it. It's like I use buying a car as an example. If someone said, I'm going to give you $20,000 and you got to buy a car and it's going to last you the rest of your life, you're going to be a lot more aware of what kind of car you pick. But today we can lease cars We can then lease a car, return it. That's the way our dating environment is. But if I said or maybe I'll give you 50,000, this is the car that has to last you the rest of your life. You might treat that decision with a lot more intentionality. And that's what being committed to commitment is.
I love that phrase, committed to commitment.
Yeah, by the way, trademark Jonathon Aslay.
Yes, 100%. And so thank you, Jonathan, so much for all of the wisdom and insights you've shared today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know I've got a lot from our chat today, and I know a lot of the listeners will as well. If I'd love to finish up by asking what's a really actionable step the listeners can do in the next 24 to 48 hours if they are looking to take their first step on the self-love journey so they can improve their dating experience.
Well, I'm going to be selfish here and recommend my book.
Yeah.
It's called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? But let me tell you why, okay? It's a very simplistic journey, okay? And it has nothing to do with dating and relationships. But in the back, I have my recommended reading materials and recommended books and videos and workbooks. I have a gigantic list. It's the journey I went on to becoming more evolved than where I was 20 years ago. There are a number of books in the back that I highly recommend. Today, I recommended a lot of books. What you want to do is start reading, start studying, start doing personal development workshops, going to a therapist, maybe even meditating, starting yoga. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. Start with one thing. And I love your podcast. Actually, you can. I was at a point in my life where I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. I was that depressed. And it wasn't until I found my purpose, which is doing what I do today, is making a difference in people's lives. And I had one mantra. I got it from Walt Disney. It's called keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. Just every day, take a little step forward in your introspection and your personal growth, just a little bit each day. And study all the things, read all the books, and devote at least 15 minutes to an hour every day to nurturing your soul, and not manicures, pedicures, and massages, okay? Those are important too. But nurturing your emotional soul. And I promise you, you'll look back 5 years from now going, holy crap, I have grown so much. And then 5 years after that, you'll say the same. And 5 years after that, you'll say the same.
I love it. Such powerful action steps. And so if someone is looking to get their hands on a copy of your book, where can they do that?
Amazon is my name is listed here. So you can Google my name. You can go to Amazon to get my book. You can go to my YouTube channel if you're curious about, I have almost 200,000 followers. So, I do get a fair amount of views on my videos. You can learn about dating, mating, and relating there. It would be just a couple places to go.
Amazing. And I'll put those resources in the show notes. So if you're out and about, I got you covered. But thank you so much today, Jonathan. I so appreciated your time, and thank you very much for jumping on.
Thank you, Myth. It's been a fabulous time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this was helpful. If you thought of someone while listening to this podcast, I would be so grateful if you could share this episode with them. While you're doing that, please also take a moment to leave a review on the podcast if you haven't yet already. It takes less than a minute, and it means so much to me and helps this podcast to reach more people just like you. Thank you so much for that, and I'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, go out and achieve every dream you have, because actually, you can.